come on, let's chat about this. Let me say a couple things before I even get started. Number one, this is not a lecture of me speaking to you. The topic of quarantine is boring enough. It can be painful enough that the best part for you guys to ask questions and thoughts. Certainly not the master of this, but with the experience we have in this room, we can get any questions you have. I know I've talked to a number of you in here before about this very thing. Can you guys hear me okay without this?
Yep.
Can you guys?
Bobby, please use it. Bobby.
Use the mic.
You can't hear it?
To the camera.
Oh, you want to film me? Perhaps I need to be nice to them. So the point here is we want to talk a little bit about quarantine today, and not because it is an exciting or a sexy topic, but I'm just convinced for those that you know me how important it is. How many of you have been in this hobby for less than a year? Show me your hands. I've got a few people. How about 3 years or less? All right, so we're getting more. So now I have to ask the honest question. How many of you in this room faithfully quarantine every fish you put into your main display tank? No filming. I think, okay. From now on, you learned a lesson, didn't you? Usually that is what it takes for you to get to this point. I will tell you guys, I was telling Bob earlier, I've been keeping marine tanks for about 25 years, and I certainly did not always quarantine everything. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I lost a number of fish. I don't know exactly what it was. It could have been any number of diseases in an aquarium. But it cost not only thousands of dollars, but lost some fish that I might not ever be able to get again. And certainly not as healthy as they were at the time. So when you look at how much money we in this room spend on this hobby that we're all pretty passionate about, I'm going to show you here how easy it is to set up a quarantine tank, how to use it, and how really inexpensive it is to save what you're trying to do here. So let's jump in here to the first thing and ask yourselves, why do we need to quarantine your fish? Real quick, for the purposes of now, we're going to talk about fish. We can get into invertebrates at the very end and make a couple of mentions about this. But for the purposes here, for these 15 or 20 minutes, is to give you a brief understanding of why, how, and some various methods to do this. So this is back and forth, so ask questions if you have them. Why would we quarantine? Certainly disease prevention and control is the thing that comes to mind the most when you think about quarantining fish. Allowing the fish to settle in. I'll tell you, this is something that's amazing to me, that we go to these stores or we order something off the line and we buy a creature that perhaps in the last week has come across the globe, and we expect that we can throw it into a box of water and think that it's just going to be fine and the other fish won't mess with it, won't bother, it will be okay. And it's really kind of crazy for us to think that's the case. What if you allow a fish to be settled into its own tank, begin to eat, begin to understand its captivity, it will change the way it lives and success in your tanks. Allow for time for observation. Ensure it's eating properly. I don't know about you guys, but how many of you got a fish that you bought at the store and it didn't eat? Probably quite a few of them. Even the pros are going, it didn't work. Well, if you've got it in its own little area that you can work on it one-on-one, you're certainly able to do it. You know how it is, you put a fish in your tank and all the other fish are really aggressive eaters, right? This little guy that never gets to eat anything. So not only is he scared, but now he can't eat. So he's certainly not happy. And the last is my most favorite. It keeps you from making hasty decisions with your main tank. My number one, people ask me, having been in this hobby for 30 years, but marine for 25, is what's the number one key to success? And it's a cliche, but it's patience. If you cannot be patient in this hobby, even when you're standing at the store and they just got the new shipment in and, oh, I like that powder blue tank, it's awesome, I'll take it. You're going to have problems. And when you have a quarantine tank set up or available, it allows you to look at the tank and do research, because we all know you didn't do research when you were standing in the store. And it allows you to say, well, maybe I shouldn't have had that, or maybe here's what I got to do for it. So it allows you to make some good decisions. Thoughts about this? Why do you quarantine? Why are you going to start doing it from now?
To avoid bigger problems down the road.
That's right. What else? Who has ever quarantined at all, even if it's just a one-time shot? How many of you tried it? Okay. What was your reasons? I know why you did it, but tell everybody.
I lost the better part of 30 fish out of a 120-gallon display, and like Bobby said, it was a collection of fish that I'll probably never be able to acquire again. All because it was the very last fish that I was adding to my display. The very last one, and I was done. And that fish wiped out almost everything.
We don't know why. I'll give you some ideas of what the main issues we see in today's hobby with disease and whatnot, but it can be any number of things. We don't know what happens in our house, chemically speaking, biologically speaking, mechanically. How about 3-year-olds throwing in, I read a story about a 3-year-old throwing in a flashlight to the sump of a tank. Who the hell knows what's in the battery casings? So this is why it's important to do things like this.
I might throw in one more thing, because you're expanding the topic to include, invertebrates, what have it, is to allow yourself some time to observe and get rid of pests as well.
Absolutely.
A lot of folks in the industry stick their corals on little pieces of PVC pipe, what have you, because once the worms or have you get into your system.
You'll never get in. We talk about small, not microscopic, but small life forms coming in on frag plugs or rock or whatever discs. Yeah. And we'll talk about the invertebrates at the end, and then we'll expand. We can expand on that in full form if you guys want to. All right, I'll move on. All right, next question that always comes up. How do I set up one? What's the #1 barrier for those of you who have never quarantined your fish before? Give me some feedback.
Space.
Space. What else?
Money.
Money. That's the #1. Space is #2. What's the third, you think?
Time.
Time?
Another tank.
Okay, another tank. That's fair enough. Lazy. It's honest. I like that, man. I like honesty. So you guys, these are all the barriers that you face. Space, I get it. I'm fortunate. I have a whole other room, no other, extension of the house that I can play fish in. You don't all have that fortune. But I will tell you, I think most of you have room for a temporary 10-gallon if you had to, if it was worth saving your aquarium. So, very simple solutions. This is not your chance to have a second display tank, okay? #1 to your spouse. So that you can. Okay, yeah. Your quarantine tank is not your chance to have another display. I assure you. It is temporary. It is meant for a purpose. Basic needs. These are things you kind of have to have, in my opinion. And there's some advanced needs, potentially. The tank itself. Certainly some biofiltration. We'll talk about that in a second. A heater, even here in Louisiana. And then some kind of shelter, which tends to be something inert like PVC pipe or something like that. I will say here that when you do set up a quarantine tank, you don't want to use any kind of calcareous material, live rock. Observation tanks, it's one thing. But for treating fish, for medicines and stuff we'll get to in a moment, you certainly don't want to use any type of live rock, which you would have shelter. Some advanced needs. Mechanical filtration, I've always found it to be helpful, and because I do tend to feed a lot when they're in quarantine. And then additional flow depending on species that you're trying to treat. For example, I quarantined an Achilles tank, a 55-gallon tank, and I needed to have quite a bit of flow in that tank as compared to had it been some other type of fish. So there's going to be some species-specific things you might want to look at. Real quick on biofiltration, one of the biggest questions that comes to me quite a bit. Hey, come on, guys. Are you here for the fish meat, or are you here for the beer? Fish. Both? Come on. One of the things that kind of comes to me a lot is how do I maintain biological filtration, right? Because most of you probably wouldn't or couldn't keep a tank running constantly. So how do you use that? Well, some of you are probably not familiar with sponge filters. I've used them forever, but they're great little ways you can keep a biological filter going. You can throw one in your sump and let it run off an air pump. And then when you need biofiltration, you can move it over to the quarantine tank to use like that. Those little bitty hang-on-the-back pictures of the bio wheels, they're also nice for little biofiltration types of things that you need. So if you are going to set up a tank for immediate use and then take it up and down, it would be easy to have some kind of biofiltration going, if that makes sense. So, questions about that? Size depends on what you're working on. I mean, I run a 29-gallon, I'm going to show you a picture in a second, of constantly running, but I do have other tanks that I've used for different species, like I mentioned, the Achilles tanks. Let me show you a picture of my current setup, and then we can ask questions. 29-gallon tank, sponge filter, PVC pipe. I've got a blue line angel in quarantine right now, a little long-nosed hawkfish right here with him. Little light, little hang-in-the-back filter. That's it.
And an auto feeder.
Little auto feeder because I travel. Yeah, I'm lazy. Hey, hell, if I get a fish to eat pellets in quarantine, it's a great help. They do get frozen and other things every few times a week too. So, all right, thoughts about setting one up? Questions? This is your time. What do you think? Size, cost? Well, how much do you think it would cost to set this up?
$100.
Less than, right?
75.
Yeah, probably about. So,
I did my 40 breeder just like that for 75.
all right, so 40-gallon breeder for $75. Probably if you can find a used tank on our forum or somewhere else, or a Petco dollar sale. A lot of the other PVC pipe costs $3. The sponge filter is about $7. The light is just some cheap fluorescent tube. Guys, you're looking $75 or less to save hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars on your fish. What else? Questions, thoughts about this? About how to set it up?
How often you change the water and stuff?
In my case, in the 29-gallon tank, I do a 5-gallon water change a week. If I do have medicine in it, and I'll get to that in a moment, I just put whatever medicine, that 5 gallons worth that I'm taking out to keep the medicine level curve. Just an easy 5-gallon bucket change, but you cycle it out.
You don't end up having to cycle or anything?
In my case, no, I keep the filter going. If I don't have a fish, for whatever reason, for a while, I'll throw some food in there, a piece of table shrimp, something just to keep the bite. In my case, I just buy the fish. But, or in some of y'all's cases that you're not going through as many as I may, like yourself, Ken, you may sort of set up a 10-gallon tank for that fish you're buying. And when you're done quarantining, you drain it down, you put it away.
But you said you can keep your sponge filter in your sump, right?
I would.
But aren't you going to run into issues if you have it in there with medicine and then you take it?
Possibly. But for as cheap as the sponge filter is, for the
Just
sponge
replace it.
replacement of $3,
Yeah, okay.
$4, I'd buy a 10-pack of them and just keep the sponge in the sump of your display tank. The main body of it, which is
Just throw it away after you use
Yeah,
it.
throw the sponge itself away. You can just keep the sponge in your display tank in the bottom.
And you wouldn't run carbon or anything in there, right? Because a lot of those hang on the back, filters come with like little carbon packs and stuff like that. You wouldn't run that.
If I'm not running medication, I would.
Right.
But obviously I use the carbon to get some of the other medications out
Right.
between different types or between phases of quarantine, which we'll get to in a second. What else? Thoughts? Questions? Y'all are easy crowd.
How many fish would you put in that setup right now?
The most I've ever done with a big bodied fish like an angel, probably just him and one other, like a little hawk fish. I have put a few anthias in there, smaller ones. I had a trio of ventralis for a while that I had more than 5. It just depends on body mass and size. You got to kind of use your gut on that. If it's clear that you can't put a big Achilles in a 29-gallon tank, it's pretty clear. Same with any kind of powder blue, or most tanks that need swimming water, large angels, those types of things. Good news is about being bare bottom is that if they do have a messy fish, you just siphon out the bottom and you can do your water change. There's no reason to have much of it. One other thing I would add here that I didn't list was, you know, if you're putting one up and down, Ken, like we talked about, those little Real Alert wheels, those little tabs that CChem makes, those are probably good to have then to help you keep an eye on ammonia. You want to make sure that you're not running into any kind of pre-cycle issues while it's being set up. What else, guys? Anything else? When and how long to quarantine? As mentioned, quarantine all fish. I'm just going to tell you right up, that's what I do. I'll tell you that some will, we'll get to ick in a minute in the cryptocarian and the primary one that we fight with in this hobby, but I quarantine them all. I quarantine for a minimum of 2 weeks for observation. That's just to make sure they're eating. And that's just to make sure that the fish is healthy, that I'm not going to run into any issues. That's just a very basic, let the fish settle in, again, like we mentioned too. Beyond that, 2 to 8 weeks, beyond this, depending on what you're trying to achieve. We'll get to some particular diseases here in a moment, some primary ones, and those are we'll talk about those. But that's about how long you would look at. Depending on the fish, I had a powder blue that was brought to me very, very sick. It was going to die. I had him in quarantine for 4 months, but he eventually was just a stunning fish now. But it took a long time to get him away.
You ever had any fish die in quarantine?
Sure. But I'd rather have died in quarantine than die in my tank. And that's another part of being patient and having that happen in your quarantine.
Not to preempt your talk, but do you incorporate dips and baths going
Well,
in or out of one?
I've not been really good with dips and baths themselves. And you can share that here in a moment if you want. No, I want you to, because I'll get to some treatment stuff, but, you know, it's just something that's never been a part, you know, a formal bath or whatever else. What would you
Are there very many people here who are actually in the life I mean, not the porn biz, but
Yeah.
in the pet fish industry. Come on, don't be ashamed. Retailers, e-tailers,
Nope.
breeders,
I
no.
don't think any of our guys do that.
It's a very common approach to eliminating external parasitic and some infectious diseases is to run marine fishes through a freshwater pH-adjusted freshwater bath. Sometimes, as Bobby says, with formalin or other medications in it. And not so much as hobbyists in particular. GT was nice enough to take me around some stores here. It seemed like they knew what they were doing, what have you. But the people are dealing in large numbers of animals, and in particular mixing them together, or if they have recirculating systems where all the water's getting mixed between all the systems, they can benefit in the long haul from using preventative dips, or if the animals are longer in water, baths, what have you. But I wish it was a standard, protocol in the trade. There are some good wholesalers that do it, but not everybody.
So to Bob's point, just to clarify, if you were to bring your fish in for quarantine, you may know what your salinity and your pH in the quarantine tank is, and you would mix up fresh water. Would make sure the pH is the same. That's really important, and the temperature ideally pretty darn close. And then let that fish dip briefly. How long would you say?
It depends on the species. Some animals, especially ones that live in close association with invertebrates, like clownfishes, the little gobies, what have you, they really don't like being dipped. And so those, and you never do it without being right there. Don't go get a cup of coffee, what have you. And if you use things like formalin or formaldehyde, you have to run aeration. And of course, there are some people that have RO water. You may know this or not. RO water has no dissolved oxygen.
Sure.
So people are like, I don't know what happened to my fish. Trying to jump out of the bucket. Well, you want to be right there because it may actually jump off the bucket. But generally 5 or 10 to 10 minutes is the most good that you're going to do yourself, period. And for folks who go, I don't really want to get involved in fooling around with pH, you can just use sodium bicarbonate, Arm & Hammer, baking soda. And it won't raise the pH too high, about 7, 8 is about the highest it'll go. So just putting some of that in and mixing it up in a bucket of fresh water is fun.
And that will deal with a lot of the external parasites.
Most of the principal ones, cryptocaryon, velvet, what have you.
Aside from formalin, what else would you use as a dip?
Use malachite green. A lot of people use that. I like to actually use methylene blue.
I was
I don't
gonna
know how
say-
many old timers.
I got heard that.
But methylene blue is very safe. In fact, some places where people don't want blood transfusions, it's actually injected into babies who have troubles with, right when they're born, what have you. And I think it does a lot of things. It's not a very strong antifungal, antibacterial, but also makes the water darker, so it makes the animals feel a little more calm.
And like what strength would you make?
You can read the label. Some of the fan and cordons products, because I think they're a good value. They can give you a dosage, but I would tell you methylene blue, there's no way to kill it. 5 to 10 minutes. And the standard pickle bucket you have doing all your pet fish work, that's good enough. As I say, everybody who's in the industry, as a wholesaler or collector, all the public institutions, all public aquariums, they all quarantine everything. They all use freshwater bath. It's a standard operation.
So that's something you sort of do with or without quarantine, because it doesn't take any space to do. Talk about some of the frequently encountered diseases. These are the ones that you would find most commonly. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. And we were talking to Bob earlier about there's sometimes things that happen in your tank that without a microscope and some knowledge, you probably can't quite figure out. The number one that we tend to face is the cryptocaryon irritants. We call it marine ick. Guys, let's make sure from those of you who came from the freshwater hobby, it is not the same animal and parasite. In fact, it's not even close. How many of you started with freshwater before you did the saltwater thing? How many of you had ick in those freshwater tanks? How many of you raised the temperature to help get through the life cycle? How many of you know that doesn't do you any good in the marine tank, or very little? So understand that when you, for those of you who came from that freshwater side, and you usually see the little white spots on your fish, that does not translate to the same treatment, okay? So cryptocaryon irritants is what the actual name of the parasite is, and it is a parasite. Flukes, this is one, I gotta tell you, I think it's become rampant in the hobby. And I think it's rampant in the local fish stores, and I assure you in our region, because I go to every one of them, they are in their tanks. And if you see them in any number of fish, but primarily the larger fish, angels, tangs, especially some of the angels, and they'll look like, if it's a real bad infestation, small little white translucent teardrop. And I'll tell you what, if you ever see your fish flashing on the sand or the rocks and they don't have the white spots, perhaps they don't have the ick, it's very likely to be flukes. And I will tell you, the treatment for this quarantine is very easy, and it's something you should really watch out for. Lymphocystis, I see this a lot of comments and pictures on the boards about, what is this? It looks like a really bad calcium ick. You ever seen it on your fish? It looks like a little cauliflower, kind of white, bumpy. You may have seen that before. No? Never had it. It's actually not uncommon. It's a viral thing, and with good water quality, and there's really not much you can do to treat it, but it will tend to go away. I had a regal angel that had a really bad quarantine, but eventually got better. They do, for some reason. Brooklynelia, clownfish. If you guys ever had your clownfish go south real quick, die, and not know why. White, hazy, kind of ick-looking stuff on it. Now, it's certainly prevalent in that species and most species. Marine velvet, you know, I don't see as much of this as I might have in the past. Usually with velvet, you'll know in about 4 or 5 days because they're dead. Right? So that's something that goes real quick. And then various bacterial infections that tend to represent themselves by reddish, how do you say it? Reddish streaks in the body, internal, looks like almost internal bleeding, these types of things. That would be an bacterial infection. Or fin rot. You guys ever seen your fish that may have like the fins look shredded, kind of eaten away? That was most likely a bacterial infection. I see people talk about fungal infections. I didn't put it up here because quite frankly, in my experience, I don't see a lot of fungal infections really in marine fish in the captive trade, so I didn't really seem it worth mentioning. But these are some of the things that you would run across in your tanks pretty easily. And I would take, quite honestly guys, just from our stores in our region. As you guys know, I travel and I go across 5 or 6 states and I hit every store in those states for the most part. And I see almost all of it at random times. So please, don't kid yourself. You're playing with a gun or Russian roulette when you're buying, not trying to knock out a new store. They do the best they can many times, they try. But as much as they have coming in and out, and if they're not, they don't have an active plan to deal with the diseases, it does tend to get through. So this is not a local fish store bash. Please don't misunderstand me. Their support is quite a bit, but the responsibility is yours to deal with these types of things once you buy the animal. So, a couple more things. Types of medication I have on hand. I say on hand. I'm kind of a fish nerd, right? I have all this stuff in my cabinet. I don't expect that any of y'all, most people would, but these are some of the primary medicines that can be used to treat some of those primary diseases and parasites. Copper, listen, there's really 3 ways to deal with ick. The number one thing I get on the boards is there any reef-safe ways of dealing with the marine ick, the cryptocarya? The answer is no. And I'm telling you right now emphatically, there's only 3 ways to do it that I'm aware of, and someone can correct me. Copper, hyposalinity, and a taint transfer method. And those are the only 3 things I've ever seen deal with it. There's any number of products in the market today that say they can do it, they just don't. If you know, I didn't put the life cycle of it up here, but I would challenge any of you to read it and understand the only way you can kill that parasite is when it's free swimming stage of its life cycle. Hey guys, come on, right? And that's the only time you can kill it. Now let me clarify something for you also guys. When you see the little white dots on your fish, that is not the parasite, okay? That is the cyst. And that is that they're under the skin, and that's why cleaner shrimps, for the most part, and cleaner wrasses don't tend to do a great job with that eating. They can't get to it. All right, so copper is the main thing I put up here. There's many number of different types of brands. We can talk one-on-one if you want to get into that. Hyposalinity is a way to deal with it. I'll tell you from my experience, it's fairly difficult to maintain it perfectly at the right salinity for the right amount of time and still deal with pH issues, in my experience. So I didn't put it up here as a great treatment. If you have questions about it, we can talk about it on the boards. We can talk about it on and the taint transfer method, just so you guys know what that means, is the parasite, when it leaves the fish's body, drops to the substrate. Here's the real evil part of nature. Have you ever noticed your fish sleep in the same spot every night? You know that, right? You ever look for your fish with a flashlight, they're always in the same spot? Well, where they sleep, the parasite falls off. And when it multiplies and comes out of its cyst, the fish is still sleeping with them the next time, and even more get on it. So it's pretty cool if you're into nature. But I'll tell you, tank transfer method, what that's talking about is as you're cycling tanks and moving the fish from tank to tank, the parasite that's settled out in the bottom is taken away from the life cycle up. But copper is the primary way of doing that. Praziquantel, which is sold primarily as Prazipro, you can find it in most stores for like koi and freshwater fish. So flukes are a big problem for koi.
I've actually seen a lot of the LFS start to carry Prazipro now, much more frequently than what they have in the past.
And it's for flukes and worms. Primarily I use it for flukes. Metronidazole for intestinal protozoa, formalin for brook, erythromycin, bacterial treatment prevention. There's a number of over-the-counter brands that you can find at the stores that if you're looking for the ingredients will list these. And then of course there's food enhancers. I'm not a real big believer that, I shouldn't say believer. I don't believe or think that just because you've gotten a fish to eat better that's going to get over disease. They certainly have immune systems, and that's all great and good, but they still have disease even if they have a strong immunity and willingness to fight it off. But these are some of the medicines that you can have to use. Questions, thoughts on this?
To that end on the food enhancers, I've actually been reading it. They've done some studies lately. Bob may be able to elaborate on this, and he may know more about it. Been reading lately, and they've been studying the effects of garlic. I know we all talk about add garlic to the food or add the garlic guard. It may introduce an appetite stimulant. A lot of what I've been reading find that it really does nothing. So just some food for thought. You may want to do some homework yourself. You may want to do some homework yourself. But garlic guard and garlic products may actually just be a waste of your money. Just food for thought, guys.
I never believed it. I think it's delicious on pizza and
Have you?
I'm a giant fan.
Guys, I'll tell you something. The primary one here is the fact is this. There's three ways to treat it. Just because you don't see the fish presenting, the number one question I get is the people who don't understand the life cycles, if they have all the white dots, right? They fell off, they went away, it must be gone. So now I'm going to add more fish. Oh, they got over it because I added tea leaves or something silly like that. Or I saw one time not garlic, cloves or something silly. Guys, none of that is the effect. What you've seen is the fish that's falling off the body, and you think you've done something. You add more fish, the cycle begins again, and it gets worse.
Have you seen any problems with bacterial resistance to the antibiotics?
Yeah,
From
it's hard to say in a
overuse and
hobbyist
stuff?
level 29-gallon tank with a pack of Marison 2, okay?
But what I'm saying is people overuse it and then you get
What
the
I'm saying,
strains.
kid, to be honest with you, the bacterial infection, if it doesn't fix it in that initial treatment of those 5 to 10 days, your fish is probably gone before you have to worry about a buildup to it.
Bobby, I can address that. So, speaking from a biological perspective, bacterial resistance to an antibiotic is only going to be an issue if that bacteria is being re-released into the wild.
Right. Or even in your quarantine tank if you don't get them all.
I mean, you're perfectly entitled to drain your quarantine tank and start over with it if you run into issues. I mean, you're really not going to hurt anything from wiping it out, starting back from scratch, cleaning it with some bleach.
Yeah,
if you really want to go that far.
Because some of the bacteria do make endospores and stuff where they can survive, just like you're talking about with the cyst for the...
The only time I've dealt with something like that, kid, is I had a horse right on one time in quarantine that had a bad bacterial infection. I couldn't get it taken care of. They finally died, and I did take the tank down and
Scrub it
with bleach, and just went about my business because for whatever reason, I couldn't take care of it. Anything else? Let's go one more here. Treatment process. Let me just offer you some guidelines. Some of this is personal and anecdotal. Use the manufacturer's recommended dosage, number one. That's what you talk about, the methylene blue. I used to own a store, guys, forever ago, and we used to keep the methylene blue in a bucket with our nets. It was that great of a deterrent against anything that can happen. So, to your point, read the directions. My personal process, I'm just going to show you guys what I do. And this is for all fish. This has nothing to do with whether I see necessarily something wrong. 2 weeks of observation and feeding. I don't ever treat medicine unless there's a really need in their eating. So I get the fish to eat first. 2 treatments of the Project Pro, which is a 2-week process ideally. 4 to 6 weeks of cooperming, and then a couple more weeks after that to assume that the fish is eventually doing okay before they get to my display tank. So
Wait, the lights on at 150 outside.
at 150 your lights are on, but not for long. It's Louisiana, there's like 10 of them out there. Alpha